The man in the corner was done. Not beaten, done. There is a difference, and everyone in that arena in Manila could feel it, even if they couldn't name it. It was October 1st, 1975, and Joe Frazier was sitting on his stool after the 14th round with both eyes nearly swollen shut. His trainer, Eddie Futch, was standing over him with a towel in his hands, and that particular stillness on his face that people who have worked corners for 40 years carry when they already know what comes next. Joe said he wanted to go out. He said he could still see. Eddie looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Sit down, son. It's over." He threw the towel. Across the ring, Muhammad Ali was being held up by his own corner. He had asked his trainer seconds earlier to cut the gloves off. He was done too. Neither man would ever admit that about the other for as long as they lived. But the fight didn't start in Manila. It started years before, in a television studio, with a single word that Joe Frazier never stopped hearing for the rest of his life. To understand what that word did, you have to go back further than most people bother to go. Joe Frazier grew up in Beaufort, South Carolina, the 12th of 13 children. His father had one arm and couldn't take certain jobs. The family grew watermelons and corn and whatever else the land gave them in a season. Joe left at 15 and ended up in Philadelphia, working in a slaughterhouse during the day and punching the hanging carcasses of cattle at night after his shift to build his hands up. He won the heavyweight gold at the 1964 Olympics in Tokyo, turned professional, and by 1970 he was undefeated, undisputed, and largely unloved by the press because he was not Muhammad Ali. And in those years, if you were not Muhammad Ali, the boxing world had a limited vocabulary for you. Ali, by then, had already become something larger than a fighter. He had refused induction into the United States Army in 1967, citing his religious beliefs. The boxing commissions stripped him of his title and his license. He couldn't fight anywhere in the country. He was facing 5 years in prison, and in that period when nearly everyone in professional boxing either stayed silent or quietly turned their backs. Joe Frazier was one of the few people who helped him. He testified on Ali's behalf. He loaned him money. He went to Washington and personally asked that Ali be allowed to fight again. He did this not because they were close friends. They weren't, not really, but because he thought it was the right thing to do. He thought he was helping a man he respected. That is the part of the story that makes everything that came after so hard to make sense of. When Ali returned to boxing in 1970, the first major fight on the horizon was against Frazier. And Ali, who had always used words the way other fighters use combinations, began building the character of Joe Frazier months before they stepped into the same ring. He called him slow. He called him ugly. He called him the white man's champion, which in 1971 was a specific and deliberate kind of charge, implying that Frazier was an instrument of the establishment, a tool, someone comfortable on the wrong side of the line. Joe Frazier, who had grown up with nothing, who had built everything with his own hands in a cold Philadelphia gym, who had gone to bat for Ali when it cost him something to do so. That version of Frazier was not part of the story Ali was telling, and the more the crowd responded, the further the story traveled from the actual man. But words have a way of escalating once they find an audience, and Ali always found his audience. In the weeks before the Thrilla in Manila, Ali went on national television with a rubber gorilla. He held it up. He called it Joe Frazier. He did this in front of cameras, in front of an audience, in front of Frazier's children who were watching at home. Joe's daughter called him crying. His mother turned the set off. Joe Frazier sat with it. He didn't talk about it much in public. He took it with him across the Pacific, all the way to Manila, and it was still there when he climbed through the ropes. There is a version of this where you can argue Ali was just selling the fight. Psychological warfare, a calculated move to get inside Frazier's head before the opening bell. Both of those things may be partially true, but gorilla is not a neutral word. In America in 1975, calling a black man a gorilla reached back into a specific history of dehumanization that Joe Frazier understood in his body before he processed it in his head. His family understood it too. Joe's daughter called him crying. His mother turned the set off and didn't turn it back on. And the fact that Ali, a man Frazier had publicly supported at real personal cost, was the one saying it made it land somewhere deeper than anger. It landed in the place where a person keeps the things they thought they were safe from. the things they didn't think to protect because they never imagined they'd need to. But here is what nobody watching from the outside could have known. Ali went to Manila carrying something too. By the fall of 1975, his body was beginning to tell him things he wasn't ready to hear. The speed that had made him genuinely different from every other heavyweight who ever lived. That quality that let him move his head 2 inches and make a punch disappear was just slightly less available than it had been. He trained hard for Manila, harder than he admitted publicly. But the margin he had always counted on between himself and real danger had narrowed in a way that no training camp was going to reverse. He knew Frazier was coming with everything. He knew this wasn't a man trying to win a boxing match. This was a man with somewhere specific to put his pain. The fight was a mutual destruction that lasted 14 rounds in the kind of heat that makes everything feel slightly unreal. The arena in Quezon City that morning was over 100 degrees at ringside. Both men felt it from the first minute. Frazier came forward the way he always came forward. Low, patient, that left hook loaded and waiting, absorbing whatever Ali threw on the outside to get close enough for the work that mattered. Ali hit him in the first 6 rounds with things that would have stopped most people. Frazier took them and kept walking. In the corner between rounds, Ali told his cornermen that Frazier hit harder than he remembered. His corner told him to keep moving. By the 9th round, both men were operating on something the body doesn't normally offer. Frazier's eyes started closing in the 11th. By the 13th, he was seeing Ali in fragments, shapes moving in and out of what his vision had become. The left hook still came because it was wired so deep into his muscle memory that it didn't require clear vision to launch. Ali survived it. Just. When the bell rang to end the 14th, Eddie Futch had already decided. He looked at Joe's face and saw a man who would walk back out there and absorb damage that no one had the right to ask him to absorb. He threw the towel. He said what he said. Joe Frazier would resent him for it for a long time afterward, though most people who watched from the outside thought Futch had probably saved his life. Across the ring, Ali's corner was cutting his gloves off. He had asked them to do it before Futch even moved. He had been close to not going back out himself. He said afterward, in a quiet moment with a reporter he trusted, that was the closest to dying he'd ever felt. Not the first Frazier fight, not Foreman in Kinshasa, Manila. He didn't dress it up. He said it and moved on. And then, when someone asked him about Frazier in that same room, he said something almost no one filed the next morning because there was too much else to write about. He said, "He's the greatest fighter in the world next to me, and I mean it." No performance in it, no audience to play to. It sounded like something that had been sitting in him a long time and came out because he was too exhausted to manage it. Whether Joe Frazier heard it or not, it came too late to reach the place where the damage had already settled. 21 years later, at the 1996 Atlanta Olympics, Muhammad Ali stood at the top of the stadium to light the torch. His hands were shaking from Parkinson's disease. The whole world watched in a silence television rarely earns. A man who had once been the loudest and fastest person alive, standing still, trembling slightly, carrying a flame. His body no longer entirely his own. Joe Frazier watched it at home. He was asked about it later, and what he said was, "I'd have pushed him in." 3 words, delivered without drama in an interview most people have long forgotten. And those 3 words contain the whole story of what the gorilla had done. Not the punches across 3 fights, not the losses, but that one word and the years of humiliation that came with it. A man watching his old rival tremble with an incurable disease. And the first thing he could access was the anger that had been living in him since 1975. Whether he meant it literally is almost beside the point. What matters is that it was still there, that close to the surface, that immediate, still the first thing that came when someone asked him about Muhammad Ali. Joe Frazier died in November 2011. Ali outlived him by 5 years, dying in June 2016. They never fully reconciled. There were moments over the years that looked like it from a distance. A handshake at an event, a carefully worded public statement, a photograph that got passed around as evidence that it was fine now, that it had been settled. But in the private interviews, in the years when Frazier wasn't performing graciousness for cameras, the hurt was still intact. Not the losses, the word. That specific word, which had found the one opening in a man who had survived everything else. Ali became an icon, a symbol of resistance and a particular kind of American beauty. Frazier became part of that mythology mostly as the obstacle, the man Ali needed to beat to become what he became. That is an incomplete version of the truth, and Joe Frazier knew it. And the knowing of it was its own kind of punishment that no rematch could have settled. What happened between them wasn't really about boxing. It was about two men who needed each other to be something simpler than they actually were. Ali needed a villain. Frazier needed to be seen clearly. Neither got what they needed. What they got instead was Manila, 3 rounds short of whatever resolution the ring could offer, and a word that one of them carried until the day he died. The fight was real. The pain was real. But the gorilla was the thing that never left the room. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. We put out pieces like this every week. The weight that history leaves behind when it turns a life into a headline.